Good morning and very warm welcome to Baby Code's free TOEFL sessions. I am Tanu Virmani, an IDP certified trainer and a TOEFL and TESOL certified trainer. I'm back with my live session number 12 for the listening module. As you know that we have already covered So you know that we have already covered up our reading module. All the 7 sessions has been uploaded on the YouTube as well as on the Baby Code application. Now we have started with the listening part. We have covered attitude questions, function questions, detail questions, just content and just purpose questions also. And now we are beginning with the organization questions. Candidates who are new to watch this session, please go back to the listening part 1 and do watch the session number 1 of listening, second, third, and fourth. Now, what are organization questions? Organization questions, they ask you, they test your skills that how better you can understand a lecture and how it is structured. So basically, they ask you to show understanding of how a lecture is structured here. You can recognize these organization questions because they often have phrases. Now, what phrases they have? The phrase number 1 is, why does the professor mentions this? Or why does the professor discuss this? So these two phrases help you in recognizing of the organization questions. Now these kind of phrases, they show that how the organization questions are often asked about examples in a lecture. So it helps also to listen for example and think about why the professor is using them. So basically, you have to understand how a lecture is structured here, right? Second thing, how a lecture is structured. Recognizing the question, why does the professor mentions this? Why does the professor discuss this? So it is often about examples in a lecture. Now these questions, they check your ability to understand the structure and organization of a spoken passage. It can be a lecture, it can be a conversation also. Organization questions, they ask you to understand how the details and informations are organized in a talk or in a lecture. The most typical question is, how is the lecture or how is the talk organized? Now, if you want to answer this question correctly, you need to understand the organization of lecture and the main theme and the main purpose of the talk or lecture. Knowing only organization of lecture may not be enough, right? So if you know only the organization of lecture, it's not enough to answer it correctly, but you have to understand the organization of lecture, the main theme and the purpose of the talk. Now you can see on my screen the question, how does the professor organize his lecture on blue jeans? And there are 4 answer choices. So your question will have always this phrase, why does the professor organize this, right? Or why does he discuss this? Organization. Now, organization means when you are recognizing the relationship between different pieces of information and almost exclusively used for lectures. They also talk about lectures here. Now, tips which you need to remember is that try to grasp the main idea, how different pieces of information are connected. Determine why specific information is mentioned. Now, is it to provide background information, give examples, support an argument, explain a concept, recognize transition words or phrases? These words, they signal the shifts in structure, that how that structure is shifting from one statement to another, and for better understanding of the flow of ideas, right? Think about how different piece of information relates to one another. Are they supporting any common theme? Are they contrasting with each other? Or they are presenting any kind of cause and effect relationship? So think about different pieces of information so that you can get your main idea here. Pay attention to the context provided by questions. Sometimes specific focus of the organization, they help you guide in identifying how your information is structured here, right? Now, TOEFL listening organization questions ask test taker to explain how information was presented in the lecture or in the conversation. They are usually one or two per passage, and they may ask you about the overall organization of passage, relationship between the two parts of the lecture, or why that particular thing is mentioned. The first two kinds are rarely seen in conversation. The third one is pretty common. Entire lecture may be organized in ways like chronological order, depending upon the level of complexity, comparison, or general to the specific one. The second time will be specifically referred to smaller parts of the lecture and how they relate to each other. The third one usually names a particular word or phrases that is included in the question. So you can see here that these are easy to organize because they are written as follows. You can see here. How does the professor discuss? How does the professor explain X about Y? Why does the professor mentions or discuss X? Why does the professor says this? So it's easier for you. If you know these phrases, then you can easily recognize the organization questions. Let's do one question. I'm going to play an audio and you have to listen it carefully and just look at the question. Why does the professor mentions glucose levels in the body? So there are four answer choices. Look for these.
Directions. Now listen to part of a talk in a biology class. The goal of homeostasis is the maintenance of equilibrium around a specific value of some aspect of the body or its cells called a set point. While there are normal fluctuations from the set point, the body's systems will usually attempt to go back to this point. A change in the internal or external environment is called a stimulus and is detected by a receptor. The response of the system is to adjust the activities of the system so the value moves back toward the set point. For instance, if the body becomes too warm, adjustments are made to cool the animal. If glucose levels in the blood rise after a meal, adjustments are made to lower them and to get the nutrient into tissues that need it. Now, when a change occurs in an animal's environment, an adjustment must be made so that the internal environment of the body and cells remains stable. The receptor that senses the change in the environment is part of a feedback mechanism. The stimulus, temperature, glucose, or calcium levels, is detected by the receptor. The receptor sends information to a control center, often the brain, which relays appropriate signals to an organ that is able to cause an appropriate change, either up or down, depending on the information the sensor was sending.
Now you have already listened to this statement, right? This lecture. So why does the professor mentions glucose level in the blood? To describe what happens when you eat too much, or to provide a relevant example of the body, to prove that body responds to external stimulus, or to cast doubt on the idea that body reacts when there is a stimulus. So the answer is second one, to provide a relevant example of the body, right? So he's giving an example. That is why he mentions about the glucose levels in the. Now see the question number 2. You can see the transcript here. Please read the transcript. And why does the professor talk about the Silk Road? To show the extent of Amber Road, to provide an example of a famous trade route, to explain how trade routes are named, or to illustrate how trade routes develop. So, female student, he said, Professor, did actually people call it that? The Amber Road? Professor said, as a matter of fact, no, they did not. The term was coined by an archaeologist, Jose Maria de Navarro of Cambridge University in 1920s. Just like the much more famous Silk Road of Asia, which was actually named that in 1877 by German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen, the Amber Road was not a single cohesive route, but an interconnected network of smaller trade routes that formed a central core that we now refer to as route. So, why do you think, why does he talk about Silk Road? Because he's talking about extent of Amber Road, or giving an example of famous trade route, or to explain how trade routes are named, or to illustrate how trade routes develop. What do you think? So the correct answer is how trade routes are named. Now, why it is this? Because you can see the explanation part also. Because professor, he explained how the term Amber Road, it's a modern invention, right? And people use that road, didn't called it that, much like Silk Road, which was named by scholar centuries later, right? Why A is incorrect? Because they explained about the extent in detail before the student asked the name, right? B is incorrect because it contradicts with the lecture, and D is incorrect because professor explained how trade routes developed at the beginning of the lecture, right? So why he mentions, the reason was the C1. Now you can have a listening tip. One listening tip for you is understand how a lecture is organized with the signal words like introductions, the major ideas, examples, conclusions. First, second, then, secondly, finally, after, at last, before, during, now, obviously, of course, cause and effect relationships, cause and effect words, signal words. So please look for these signal words so that you can know how your lecture is organized. So I hope I'm clear with today's session, the organization part. Go to the Baby Code application or the YouTube, watch our live sessions free of cost with a very nominal amount, right? You just have to subscribe the Baby Code IELTS. Keep practicing, keep learning, and watch our journey, right? Thank you so much for watching a live session. Stay tuned. Bye bye. Take care, all of you, and do practice for the organization questions.